I love that new feature.
Is that a new feature? No.
Just making sure. Oh, there we go. So everyone's jumping in now.
Brilliant.
Hello, everyone. Great to see you all. How are you doing, Emily? That bottle, that row of bottles behind you just keeps growing and growing. Or maybe it's just me. We're just going to, as per usual, folks, for those of you who are joining us maybe for the first time, we're going to give it a minute or so before we formally start, just to see if there's any stragglers and make sure everyone's got a good, clear connection, can see and hear us all okay. If not, if there's any issues with the sound or audio or anything, get them in the chat. There's a few more people joining in the waiting room there, so.
Great stuff. I recognize a few names here, I think.
Jason Nolan, that's familiar. I don't know from
yeah.
where.
Wonder who that dodgy character is.
Jack, you look like with the lighting you have in your impressive background there, you look like I don't know, like you're in an early Hitchcock film, like, you know, the kind of shadow cast over side of the face. So like, if that's the aesthetic you were going for, it's well achieved.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that's like a cigar and whiskey room. It looks like a kind of cigar and whiskey room in a way, for sure.
There's a couple of cigars. There's far too much whiskey, to be honest.
Oh, we should actually do that, actually, as a tasting. We should do a whiskey and cigar pairing. That would be unreal.
Be nice.
One to get in the diary. Oh, there's somebody already on the chat, is there?
Yeah, Jason Nolan. So, folks, that's no one's kind of joined from the waiting room there for a minute, so we'll get underway. And there's Vitaly. I was wondering when he'd show up. So how are you doing, Vitaly? Joining in the last comer. So we'll start there, guys. Folks, thank you so much for joining us for our second in-house tasting, following the Celtic cast tasting with myself, Al, and Darren last week, which was really, really great. I really enjoyed that one and got some great feedback after it. So hopefully this one will be just as good. No pressure, Julie and Jack. Now, for those of you who don't know me and who might be joining us for the first time, my name is Luke. I'm the General Manager of the Celtic Whisky Bar and Larder and Irish Whisky Experience. We're the largest collection of Irish whisky in the world, and we're the largest whisky bar in Ireland. We have a lovely bespoke cocktail menu, fantastic restaurant. We're also home to the Irish Whisky Experience, where we educate all and sundry on how to enjoy Irish whisky. So so thank you so much for joining us. I'm joined here. I'm going to get my two colleagues, my Celtic Whisky colleagues, Jack, who's based in our shop in Dublin, and Julie, who's our head of marketing, to introduce themselves. Do you want to go first, Julie? Tell us a bit about yourself. And actually, before you do, anyone, for those of you joining us who don't know the kind of how we kind of run these, we want to hear as much as possible. We want to hear your feedback in the comments. We want to hear tasting notes and comments on the whiskies. Keep them going, and we'll any questions you have. Because this one's a bit different, where we're keeping this in-house, and it's even different than last week, where it's not our own brand. So any more awkward questions that would trip up Julie and Jack, the better. We'll see how we can get on. So Julie, tell us a bit about yourself and how you ended up with Celtic before we start.
Well, give you the shortened version of the long story, I suppose. Otherwise, you might be here all night. So I'm Julie Christie. You can probably tell it's not an Irish accent. It's very much a Scottish accent. So I originally started working in the whiskey trades at the age of 18. Obviously, never touched a drop of it before then, of course. And started off as a tour guide at Deanston Distillery, which is right in kind of the middle of Edinburgh and Glasgow, in a place called Stirling. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with it. And then just kind of working their weekends over the summers and so on. And it just kind of so happened my last year of uni, I was taken around a group from Dublin, just so happened to be from Celtic Whisky. And I kind of joked around with a few colleagues. I was like, oh, sure, I'll take them around and have the crack. And you never know, might get offered a job down in Dublin. And they were actually just about to start opening the Celtic Whisky Bar and Larder down in Killarney, County Kerry, and had great fun with them, had a great laugh, said that I was coming over for Dublin for New Year and I'd pop in the shop and so on. And they said, well, we're actually opening up this new business down in Kerry. Is there any chance that you'd maybe consider coming over to work in it? And at the time, I didn't really have very much going on. As I said, I was about to graduate and wasn't really sure what kind of avenue I wanted to go down next. And I knew certainly whiskey, or certainly the drinks industry, was kind of the route that I wanted to go down. So decided to pack the bags 5 years ago and head to County Kerry, which was a bit of an experience, to say the least. It was only meant to be for a year, but it has transpired 5 years, and kind of worked my way kind of through the company to the marketing department, really. So that involves a lot of different things. With a small company, you always wear kind of multiple hats. So a tasting tonight with yourselves, or organising Whiskey Live Dublin, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, as well as like the Irish Whiskey Awards, Gin Experience Dublin, marketing for the shop in Dublin, marketing for the bar down in Killarney. So it's given us a lot of wide experience there, a lot of opportunities, met some great people in the industry, and that's kind of a bit about me. And of course, spare time, always kind of trying the newest stuff that lands into the shop and so on.
Marvelous. And tonight you're going to be going through the Bunnahabhain and Macallan with us, and Jack, you're going to be talking through the Curioshi, Newcastle and Redbreast. And I'm only getting that out there first because I know there's a few people on the chat who like to know the running order. So we're going to go Curioshi, Napogue, Bunnahabhain, Redbreast, Macallan in our 12-year-old whiskey challenge, where the clash of the 12-year-olds, we decide definitively once and for all which one's the best. But Jack, before you start us off on our first whiskey, do you want to do the same as Julie and tell us a bit about yourself, and then afterwards introduce us to our first Japanese whiskey of the night?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jack Higgins. If you've ever been to the shop, there's a good chance you might have stumbled across me. I was probably talking about whiskey, probably more than you ever needed to know. I would have started my journey in college as well. So I studied culinary entrepreneurship. So it was all very much, food and beverage business focused. I discovered in probably about second year that I quite enjoyed whiskey. After just by chance winning a bottle of Jameson Black Barrel in a raffle at a Christmas fair, and that just turned into what I do now. So from that bottle, I went on to just try a few different things. Ended up writing my dissertation in final year on barrel aging and maturation. So that's kind of what my interest was at the time. From there, I finished up college. I went off and spent a few weeks on Islay, of all places, with my dad, and just kind of got really into the core of whiskey. Really, I figured that that's what I wanted to do. So thankfully, following that, I got the opportunity to work for a fairly large whiskey company, which I spent probably close to a year there, just working on the kind of travel retail side of things. And then kind of during the pandemic, obviously that travel retail market doesn't exist anymore. And thankfully, I landed on my feet in a major way, getting the opportunity to work for Celtic, which is obviously here in Ireland, very much the kind of the pinnacle of whiskey shop, and always at the forefront of everything whiskey related in the country is Celtic. So getting the opportunity to move from one single brand to moving into a shop where I just have every whiskey brand at my disposal to be able to learn and talk about, it's just been a fantastic opportunity. And getting to do the likes of these tastings has always been great. So the last tasting I did was also a Japanese whiskey one, which is why I really like to start off with the Curioshi here. So if everybody is aboard, we can fire away with that.
Ivan.
It's definitely, as you say, that's one of the advantages of Celtic whiskey as opposed to a single brand, is that we get to do things like tonight, in the sense not just doing tasting, but the fact that you've got all these brands here that rarely I imagine see a lineup head to head. So perfect. Yeah, do you want to start with the Curioshi? So sorry for interrupting you.
No, after my flawless segue. Japanese whiskey is something that's been fascinating me recently. Obviously, as an industry, Japanese whiskey is still under 100 years old. It hasn't hit its 100th birthday yet. not for another 4 years, I think it is. 1924 was when the first ever distillery was founded. Since then, obviously, it has taken off quite a bit. I think you can tell this in kind of price wise as well, that, the whiskies are really quite sought after. And this distillery here in Matsui would be one of the younger ones, only going the guts of probably, I think they got their license probably about 20 years ago. They've only been producing for, a good few years now, but, they're very much up and coming just outside of Kyoto, which is, a nice kind of popular enough area, which I think is also close enough to where the original Yamazaki distillery was. So it is a kind of an area of kind of being a whiskey powerhouse in Japan. So the whiskey that we have here, the 12-year-old Kuriashi from Matsui, is a great example of a Japanese whiskey. Like, it is really quite floral, quite sweet. There's some fantastic just kind of apple, cinnamon notes on that as well. I think it's a lot of bourbon aging, a little bit of sherry aging in there as well, which is what, they really like to do over there in Japan at the moment.
I think you do get like a bit of citrus fruit even as well, like that sort of zesty kind of orange feel. But yeah, very, very floral and very fresh. Yeah,
no, it's quite interesting. I actually didn't realize there was a sherry cask element, but it makes sense because on the nose, it's much more complex than you'd expect. It's almost when even if there was no sherry, when bourbon starts to turn into that kind of really Christmassy, cakey kind of maturation, it's definitely smells even older than a 12-year-old to me. But yeah, it's really interesting.
And I suppose, Jack, you would know, sorry to interrupt there, but you would know, like, in the shop, in terms of, how hard it is for us to get Japanese whiskey in. Something like on social media and after tastings and stuff, it's always something that's really sought after. And as far as I'm aware, like, we're able to kind of, the Kuriyoshi, it would be quite a new brand that we've carried. And also we're able to get a kind of good supply of Nika, but everything else is quite hard to come by at the moment. I'd be right in saying.
It certainly is. And the Matsui line, it's great that we actually have their full lineup in the shop, so that we're able to kind of go the whole way through both kind of price range and age range, culminating in two single casks that they actually have as well, one aged in Mizunara and one aged in Sakura wood as well, which is a fascinating way of seeing Japanese whiskey taking on an even more Japanese influence, because a lot of these are quite heavily based on Scotch whiskey production, that kind of style. And it's nice to see that companies like Matsui are going out their way to try and put their own slightly heavier Japanese spin on it by using Japanese woods. But with this as the kind of base spirit that they're working with, you can see that they really are off to something fantastic.
Definitely.
I suppose what always gets asked when it comes to Japanese whiskey is this their own spirit? Is it coming from their own distillery or not? Do you know?
Sorry, I think I just froze there for a minute. No, as far as I know, quite a lot of it is sourced by some of their younger stuff. So I think under the new laws and regulations, though, as far as I know, this part of the range is actually good to go, absolutely Japanese whiskey. There's no worries in that part. But yeah, I think they only started actually distilling, I feel like it was 2015. So their stuff is starting to come of age now, going into some of their younger blends perhaps, but stuff like this is definitely sourced in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we they were one of our first virtual tastings we did on here. It feels like a lifetime ago now, even though it's probably only about 8 months. And I'm very impressed with them. We got a few comments coming in. Shane Prendergast says hints of vanilla. I think you're definitely right, Shane. Brendan says, what's the ABV on this? I believe it's 43%, Jack, is it?
Yeah, it is. I popped it in there, 43%. Mm-hmm. It is 46 in the US market, but 43 for us when we imported it.
Yeah, and it's non-chill filtered as well. For anyone that's kind of concerned about that, quite a few of the Japanese whiskies would be chill filtered, so keeping all that sort of natural haze and everything like that in there.
Niall says he's getting banana on the nose. And Shane asks, is there many distilleries in Japan? Either Julie, yourself, or Jack, do you know?
For the last bit of research that I did just before the Nika tasting, as far as I know, it's only about 8. And I think a good 4 or 5 of those are just between Nika and Suntory themselves as it is. So, the Matsui distillery really is one of the only, independent distilleries that's kind of started up over there.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. And there's a question there about, do we still stock Yamazaki? And I believe we technically do. It's just a case of how difficult it is to get into the country at the moment. Am I right?
Yeah, unfortunately so. At the moment, the only Yamazaki that we have is the Yamazaki Distillers Edition, which I think is coming in at about the 130 mark thereabouts. Anything coming from Suntory now is just getting harder and harder to come across. Likewise with Nika actually as well. And anything age statement is just really getting damn near impossible to get your hands on. And certainly you're paying a premium when they actually do appear.
Yeah, like I would have been quite a big fan of like the Hibikis, and I was actually lucky enough, I'd say about a year ago, I was traveling through, well, pre-COVID, obviously, I'd just like to stress that point. I was traveling through like Glasgow duty free, and I saw Yamazaki 12-year-olds, and I was like, how is this here? And snapped up a couple of bottles. I've been lucky enough to try the Yamazaki 18 in Celtic Whiskey Bar and Larder, shameless plug. And I remember when we started working there, I think it was €40 a shot. And just because it's so hard to get hold of, it's at least double, I'd be right in saying, look.
Yeah, I think we still have the Yamazaki 18. It's about €40 a shot. But you're trying.
It's gone up to 80 though, no?
Is it? God, it's been so long since I worked behind that bar.
Yeah.
It could well be. Yeah.
If it is €40 a shot, it's an expensive dram, but definitely worth it.
It's €40 if you buy me one as well. I'll give you a special deal. The Ray Dooley in the chat here says, can someone explain why some distilleries use chill filtering? Do either one of you want to discuss that?
Yeah, I'm happy to give it a go here. So usually unchill filtered whiskies would usually between about 43, 46.3, depending on the brand. A lot of places don't. It's not really a good or a bad thing. Like there's a lot of kind of controversy in the industry, but at the end of the day, it's kind of very much a personal thing, I would argue. So if you chill filter something, basically there's 2 stages of filtering. This is a very dumbed down version. So obviously you filter after the cask to get all the like bits of wood and bits of char and everything like that through. And then you also would filter again through a condenser. And basically that is cooling the liquid so that you're bottling at slightly higher. So you're not getting that slightly lower, so you don't get that haze. So particularly when whiskey would be sold overseas, depending on the climate, if it's slightly colder, if it's slightly warmer, the liquid in the bottle can go quite hazy. And, if you're somebody that's maybe not into your whiskies or starting to get into your whiskies, some people can find it quite off-putting. They might think there's something wrong with the whiskies. So a lot of brands, particularly like a lot of blended whiskies and so on, would chill filter to remove the possibility of that haze. So typically when you see an unchill filtered whiskey, like this Kurayoshi here, like the Bunnahabhain 12-year-old that we'll try later on, it prevents its bottle slightly higher, so there's less of a chance of getting that haze, essentially. Quite a lot of whiskey enthusiasts, whiskey nerds, so to speak, and I use that term with love because I am one of them, would kind of have a slight preference to unchill filtered because they believe that there's more flavors in there. There was quite a big controversy a couple of months back with Glendronach. I'm not sure if anybody saw that on Twitter. They were previously unchill filtered and they've moved to chill filtered, which a lot of Glendronach enthusiasts were very kind of disappointed to hear about. But they've made that move, and obviously Rachel Barry, Stuart Buchanan, they're experts in the industry, so I'm sure that's not a decision that they would have taken lightly.
No, certainly not. Vitaly's getting us back on track here by saying really pleasant one with lots of fruit and sweetness. Reminds me of some Scottish expressions, probably like Glengoyne or Hazelburn, which is a good sign. Hazelburn is a great shout actually, because it does have that extra kind of bit of like kind of almost floral, peary, delicate kind of nature, which the Hazelburn kind of comes through with. He says it's a decent dram. It certainly is. I must say, I really, really impressed by that one. And this was on our tasting a few months back, and I don't remember enjoying it as much as I've enjoyed it here. It really comes, those kind of nuttiness, kind of toffee flavors on the finish, really come through, kind of cherries as well. Do you have any parting thoughts on this one before we move on to the Napogue? No? Perfect.
like you, it's I was really, really impressed with it. As I said, huge fan of Japanese whiskey at the moment. I've been trying to get my hands on as much as I can, and I've tried a couple of the other curiosities, but I haven't actually had a chance to try the 12 yet. So that's why I jumped at the opportunity to do this tasting, so I could shamelessly get it without having to necessarily buy a bottle. But you know, for the price that it is, you can't really go wrong at all.
I'm after making an amateur error here, because I'm after finishing mine completely, and normally I keep a bit in the glass to kind of, you know, cross-reference as we go forward. So already off to a bad start. This is it's 106, is it? In the shop, am I right?
Yeah, it should be thereabouts. I think it's, yeah, that sounds about right. Just over the 100 mark.
That's, I mean, for Japanese whiskey, there's a bit like where Irish whiskey is moving in that regard at the moment, in terms of an inflationary effect on you know, when you've got a finite amount of really good quality whiskey and a huge demand for it, you tend to pay a few bob. So 106 in that context is actually not bad money at all. And as Ray says, it's one for the collection. Now the next one we're going to come on to, which I think you're also going to do first, Jack, is the Napogue cask and Marsala cask. Now, before you introduce this one, I must say this is actually one of my all-time favorites. I remember when you started in the Celtic whiskey bar, as you can see in the picture behind me, there's a huge array of whiskies, and when you're kind of, you think you know your whiskies, which I did as an arrogant 25-year-old or whatever, standing behind the bar there. You go in thinking, oh yeah, I know what I'm about, and then you turn around and you're like, oh fuck, I know nothing in context of what's behind me. And you find after the first couple of years, I think the Napogue cask Marsala was one of my favorite ones that I settled on, and that Marsala was actually a very old batch that Celtic Whiskey had done as a single cask with Napogue long before I was working for the company, and I started with Celtic Whiskey in 2016. So it was already an old bottling by then. I'm not sure, I can't remember off the top of my head when it was, but it's probably around, I'd say, 2012, 2013. So this is a much newer rehash of that earlier ones. So I believe they might have been the same casks. So this is a couple of years old. So do you want to tell us? I don't want to take over. I just got a bit nostalgic and romantic when I poured it and smelt it, because I do have a soft spot. But do you want to tell everyone about it, Jack?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Celtic at the moment, you know, in the shop as well, we have obviously the core range in Napogue being your 12-year-old, which is all bourbon aged, your 14, which is bourbon, a little bit of sherry in there, your 16, which is bourbon and sherry again, and then your 21. And then we have these 3 12-year-olds that have all got different cask influences on them. And this one in particular being from cask used from the Marco Bertoli winery, I suppose you call them, producer, house,
bodega,
family.
maybe,
bodega. So obviously they would be, you know, Marsala producer that we heavily focus on in the shop, you know, in our actual Marsala section. So to be able to take that from our wine room and bring that into the whiskey room then is absolutely, you know, fantastic to be able to show off that we've been able to kind of create this relationship and create this bottling. And as Luke said, it really is quite a magical one. I remember, you know, again, you've probably seen me on a couple of videos that I do every now and then, popping up on Facebook and the likes. And I think one of the first ones I ever did was this 12-year-old from Napogue. I suppose not much more to say until just get into it.
Yeah, no, it's got a stunning nose to it, and that Marsala comes through. We actually in on the, obviously you have it in, you've got like literally hundreds, I'd say, Marco Bartoli bottles in the shop, but in we have a dry and sweet one on our menu in the bar, on our fortified wine menu, and you really get the Marsala massively comes through, like, you know, those that kind of dried fruits, that almost kind of coffee note as well, and you get that kind of, it's the malt is Bushmills, am I right? Or is it Cooley?
Well, I think it is Bushmills, because it was something I was going to say, was just you get that nice kind of almost blackcurranty note, which is really indicative of a nice kind of old Bushmills malt going into it. And that, with combined what you're saying about the kind of coffee notes that you're getting from Marsala, are absolutely beautiful together.
I mean, I've always
so nutty.
Oh, definitely, yeah. But I know it does say triple distilled on the bottle, so I always just assumed a 12-year-old single malt triple distilled. There's kind of only one place that can come from. So, but I don't know if that's common information or not. But
that is now.
well, I'm not saying I have it on any authority. I'm just, you know, like we said last week's Celtic cast tasting, you know, if it's a pot still of a certain vintage and it's from Ireland, there's only one place they can come from. You know, we have to use our noggins a small bit. Some great comments coming in. Shane says getting a sweetness to the finish, and Brendan says the finish is sticking blackjack's sweets around your gums till they get numb. Interesting. Are blackjacks the kind of the licorice round ones, am I right?
Yeah. So yeah.
Blackjack's a fruit salad.
I have very like fond memories, like in the bar. I remember we actually, as Luke was saying there, like it was one of the kind of favorite whiskies. I think it was batch 2 at the time. I seem to think this is maybe batch 3 of the collaborations that we've done with Napoleon, and we were actually like selling it so quickly that we were like, you actually, the staff, you actually have to stop selling this because we need it to last a bit longer. And if you are ever in the bar, like I will give you a tip, always ask what's at the very back of the bottom shelf, because that usually is all the stuff that we're trying not to sell too hard because they're staff favorites. So that's always a recommendation if you're down there.
Yeah, no, I think I mentioned when we did one with Laurie, we did a lock-in sort of tasting celebrating the bars of Ireland that weren't open, and I said there's nothing that we'll never refuse to sell anyone a whiskey in the bar, be like, oh, we're saving this. But as you mentioned, Julie, we just won't necessarily upsell it, you know, you'd have to request it. And this is the original one of these, if there's still some there, is definitely one of those that unless you know what you're asking for, you might not necessarily, it would definitely won't get offered to you. Kevin says, am I crazy or am I getting aniseed? I definitely can see aniseed, yeah. Pretty inexperienced here, but the only thing I can compare to, well, this is the beauty of these tastings, Kevin. It's all very subjective. Whiskey is a very personal and emotive journey we all go on. So there's no right and wrong answers. You're not sitting a wine exam. Am I right, Jack?
Absolutely. I remember doing my wine exams, and I'm glad they're all behind me now. And I get to just sit back and enjoy these things in the whiskey world. This bottling as it is, I know you're talking about the older bottling as well, but this one already as it is just less than 700 bottles. So even this is very, very limited. So we do still have a few of them in stock in the shop, and I know I enjoyed it the last time, but having it again now, it's just, I forgot just how good it was.
I think like all sort of like Napoleon Castle expressions, though, like particularly like the 12 and the 14, they're very approachable drams. They're very inoffensive, but they're very tasty drams as well. But when you get something like cask finished, or if you go a little bit higher up on the age statements, they just have that kind of nice complexity at the end, that, as I said, nutty finish, like almost quite juicy, but then kind of dry in the back as well, which is quite unusual.
Absolutely. Like a lot of people come into the shop just wanting to try kind of their first bottle of whiskey. The Napoleon Castle 12 is a fantastic one to go for, you know, at just about €50 for, you know, a nice age statement single malt, you know, all bourbon aged. It's, you know, fantastic, gets them into it. A lot of people come back to say, you know, this is what I had, you know, and I really enjoyed it. And actually taking the step up to one of these cask finishes or the likes of the 16 or something like that, absolutely, you know, the complexity really does open up then.
And as you mentioned, just under 700 bottles, so €95, and more limited than the Japanese one we just tasted. It's definitely a great bargain. And also, I suppose the other thing, and I don't know, again, this is just sheer speculation here, I have knowledge, but obviously they've Castle Brands, who produce in the Pogue, have recently been purchased by Irish distillers. So we don't know what the future holds for the brand, and this, I'm sure it's going to be really exciting and interesting things, but there might not necessarily be a lot more limited single casts like this, or I'm not saying there is or isn't, but we don't know. So definitely snap them up while you still can. So there you go, top tip.
Yeah.
Are we ready for number 3, or am I going too quickly?
Let's see if we'll give it a second to see if anyone's got any more comments on it. We love hearing from you. So Luke Toman agrees with Kevin in the sense that definitely getting aniseed. Niall says a drop of water really opens up the woody notes on the nose. Have you tried it with a bit of water, guys?
No, I'm going to do that now, actually. Well, I still have some left.
And as well, just in case anyone was wondering, it is bottled at 46% as well. So nice, it'll just kind of step up from, your base 40 or 43. So absolutely a little drop of water can help.
And non-chill filtered, which I think you said as well. It's interesting, we were saying, well, go back to the non-chill filter thing. We were talking when we had Al Higgins on, I presume no relation there, Jack, last week, for the Celtic cask. We said, oh, this is non-chill filtered, and obviously, especially for a while, I suppose it still is the case, but I know when companies like small craft brands and companies like Teeling came out and said, oh, we're not chill filtering, and it definitely was over about 10 years ago or 5 years ago a trend in the whiskey to kind of move away and move to this idea of non-chill filtered. So I was kind of thinking that Jack is going to say, oh, we decided to, or Al, sorry, is going to say, oh, we decided to non-chill filter the Celtic casks because, we wanted to preserve different flavors. And he was like, no, we couldn't afford it. It was our first single cask, and chill filtering doesn't come free. So I was like, good answer. But yeah, this is non-chill filter as well.
I love that. You can always rely on Al for the honest answer. For sure. Yeah, so I'll let you comment on the chat there. Before we
come go on to the next one, we'll leave it on. We'll leave the Napogue on Emily's chat. She says apologies for going backwards a bit. Added water to the Karaoke and getting strong bubblegum flavors now. Interesting. Definitely. I mean, I could definitely see bubblegum flavors in a whiskey like the Karaoke, especially it's got that touch of sherry as Jack mentioned, because Dunville's 12, one of my favorites. I think you add a drop of water to that, and it really, you get lots of fresh grass and bubblegum kind of come out of it. So that's an astute tasting note, I'd say, Emily. Fair play. So we're going to come on next. Or Vitaly says, always like the Podcastle whiskies. The Ordinary 12-year-old is one of my tops for value for money, 100%, as Jack mentioned, a great introductory whiskey. And Marla, as you said, Jack, around 50 euros at that price point, less than your Redbreasts or high range single malts, but your step up for your blends. It really is good quality. And Vitaly says that the Marsala finishing indeed brings some interesting flavors, defo worth the extra money. I think Vitaly is someone I'd really respect on these matters. So take his word on it. So Julie, do you want to tell us? We're going to come on to the Bunnahabhain now.
Yeah, we are.
Or is it the Bunnahabhain or Bavin?
I'm just so proud of you for pronouncing it right. There was many a day where there was Lafrogs and Lagavulin.
I was never bad. I was never as bad as Lafrogs. Although we still, when we still go through them sometimes, we were like, how is Glenallachie called Glenallachie? It just doesn't look that way. But I mean, people say that the Irish have, with Siobhans and Bees, and there's always the on-running joke about different names. But I tell you, not just in Scotland, but all over the UK. I lived in London, and I lived in Southwark, as they call it. But I was thinking, someone said, oh, where are you moving over to, Luke? I was like, oh, I've got a nice little apartment in Southwark. And I'm like, how this, or Dulwich. I don't know how these places, how you work this out. So tell us about the Bunnahabhain, Julie.
Yeah, so Jack actually was like to me before the tasting, he was like, oh, we'll have a bit of Scotch and Irish rivalry here, so we'll see how we get on. So with the Bunnahabhain, so the BH is kind of with a V sound, and that would mean mouth of the water in Scots Gaelic. Bunnahabhain is quite an old brand. It's a little brand that I'm kind of biased about. Back when I worked at Deanston, Bunnahabhain was the sister distillery over in Islay, and they also had Tobermory over in the island of Mull. Ballymorey, for anybody that's not familiar with that. And I was very privileged enough to go over and work in the distillery for a week or so, and work over at the Fesh Isle, Isla's Whiskey Festival there. For those of you that are into your whiskies or are getting into your whiskies, I'm sure Jack will even agree with me, like there is no place like Isla. It's just, you just feel like you're the end of the world, you're in whiskey paradise. The people are absolute characters, and I have a story about that later on, but I think we might need to wait for a few more whiskies before we talk about that. Oh, somebody's talking in Irish there now. I don't know if
Ray says Bail na Heaven in Irish. So
I'm
there you
so
go.
glad you pronounced that. So the distillery itself, it dates back to 1883, and it gets its water from the Margadale Spring. So that's quite a unique characteristic to Bunnahabhain. It's the only distillery in the island to get its water from that source, and it's based up in the north of the island. So your Lafroigs, your Lagavulins, your Ardbegs would all be the very south of the island. Traditionally the peat monsters, whereas Bunnahabhain is kind of up on the top, relatively on its own. Closest distillery would be Kalila distillery there, and it looks over the Paps of Jura. So you can hop on the ferry at Port Askaig, and you're about 15-20 minutes over to Jura. If you do get the chance to go over, absolutely breathtaking view, stunning location. Since I was last there, they probably kind of needed to invest quite a lot of money in the actual visitor centre side of things. But kind of a few years ago, they were bought by a company called Distel, and they seem to kind of be putting a lot of money into kind of the visitor centre experience and stuff. So I'm looking forward to going back over after COVID and kind of seeing what they've done with the place, really. Very unusual for an Islay whiskey to be unpeated. The Bunnahabhain core range is unpeated, so you're not really going to get a smoky flavour from it. If you were looking for your Lafroigs or your Bowmores, it's very, very different. You might get a little bit of wisp of smoke in there, but traditionally that kind of maritime, kind of coastal influence, I think, really comes through. That being said, they do make peated spirit at Bunnahabhain for a couple of months in the year, called the Monya, and that's about 35 to 40 parts per million. So that would be the strength of the peat, essentially. So usually kind of most whiskies would be under 5 parts per million, where there's kind of no peat detected, whereas your Ardbeg, which would be very smoky, would be like 50 or 52 parts per million, so very smoky, just to kind of give you an idea of the smoke levels there. So we're going to be trying the 12-year-old today, which is one of their core expressions, predominantly matured in ex-bourbon casks, but there is also some sherry casks in there as well. I'm not 100% sure on the proportions. Back when I was working with them, it was kind of like a 70% bourbon cask ratio to about 30% sherry cask. But I wouldn't be confident in saying that now because they have rebranded since then, and obviously it does kind of vary batch to batch. So let's give it a little nose.
It's got a very recognizable kind of Scotch kind of maltiness kind of to the nose.
Yeah, I even think like you are even getting a little, you can tell like you've kind of not moved up, as in not that this whiskey's better than the last two that we've tried, but just in terms of depth on the nose, I think straight away you can get that little bit of even like medicinal coming through, not peat at all by any chance, but that sort of like dried fruit. You know you've hit a sherry cask. And then if you want to give it
definitely is that kind of seaweedy brininess as well.
Brininess, definitely, yeah. Kind of coastal note to it.
So yeah, you will get that like dried fruit flavor to at the beginning. Again, that sort of like marzipan flavor. But as you were saying there, Jack, like you are going to get that kind of sea salt, seaweed, kind of coastal brininess at the back. It's almost, it doesn't taste like a sea salted caramel, but it's like that kind of your sweet and your salt combined.
It's also just on the, like, looking at it in the glass, it's got a lot more, the legs or tears are a lot more present. It's a lot oilier than the first two.
100%, yeah. Look, Toman was saying, you know, a lot of body. You can tell it's a lot fuller on the palate. You know, it's not even too dissimilar. I know we'll probably try that next, and I might be eating my words after I say that, but it is not too dissimilar to that sort of pot still oiliness. You're not getting that same spice at all, I don't find, anyway. It's
funny because I was going to say it's pretty spicy.
Maybe I'm too used to drinking cask strength whiskies. I think that might be part of the problem.
But this isn't cask strength, is it, though? What ABV are we looking at here, Julie?
46.3.
And why the 0.3? Do you know? That's very oddly specific.
Oh, this is one thing. Like, the whole of the Burn Stewart's range is 46.3. Basically, the previous master distiller, Ian McMillan, was really passionate about unchill filtration, and he felt at 43% it didn't quite guarantee, you weren't getting quite as full of flavors, and 46.3 was the magic number, apparently. So that's the reason it's 46.3, and he no longer works anymore, so they obviously probably have kind of experimented with that, I'd presume, since he's left, and I've seemed to stick with that. So the 12-year-olds, obviously I'm a biased opinion, so you can take what you like from that, but I do think it is a cracking dram. Bunnahabhain has a great following, and it's probably kind of one of the less explored Islay whiskies, but the 18-year-olds, if you ever get to try the Bunnahabhain 18, would be one of my favorite Scotch whiskies in terms of value for money. You know, it's an 18 whiskey, 18-year-old whiskey. Yes, it's not cheap, but it's not crazily expensive either. And if you're someone that likes sherry casks, if you like that kind of mix of the sweet and the salt, it's a great option. Marvelous.
Thomas says a salty caramel taste. And Niall says, agree, Julie, a nice mouthful, but not the same spice at all. And Brendan says, Brian and Heather, lovely. Heather is a good taste note, actually. I wouldn't have thought that myself, but now that you say it, bang on. And as you mentioned already, Luke Toman says, a lot of body, very full. There's a few jokes I'll avoid there, but Jack, what do you reckon?
I think it's very good. Now that Julie has mentioned the fact that we were turning this into a little competition between Scotland and Ireland, I don't want to be too honest. But no, I absolutely loved Bunnahabhain when I did get to go over and try it. I am still hold on to, I got a tiny little sample from a cask of an 11-year-old Paolo Cortado, which I will eventually find the right time to drink it. But no, it really blew me away as a distillery. And as a core range, you know, this 12 is just, it is beautiful. It does have that nice kind of heavy, full mouthfeel like you're talking about. You know, that kind of almost pot silly style like you're saying with the oils. But no, it's definitely one that definitely impressed me.
And Julie, do you know why? Is there, like, obviously a lot of reasons that get suggested as to why places like Islay are so peat heavy is the sheer economics of it. You know, it's the local fuel source. You're out here in the tip of Western Scotland. You know, it's logical that you're going to use it in your whiskey. Why is Bunnahabhain unpeated? Is there a story behind that?
I suppose the big reason is the water source that I mentioned earlier. The likes of like Lafroig and Lagvulin and stuff, like their water source would be traveling through the peat bogs. So already you have that peaty characteristic in the water. So it's kind of, you know, would be kind of the natural decision to kind of exaggerate that, where because Bunnahabhain's water source is a spring, and the water is pooling from there, it's not trickling through peat bogs and so on. So the decision is also was the stills itself are quite tall. They don't have, you know, huge kind of reflux bowls or anything like that. So it is, although it is kind of like oilier and characteristic, I'd say that's probably more coming from the sherry casks as opposed to the actual stills itself. But then they also make the peated range as well, which I would urge people to try. The Toitcheg I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, because I don't speak a word of Scots Gaelic there. We would have the Celtic whiskey shop, and it's a very, very nice whiskey. You have that kind of sweetness, you have that floralness, and you have that smoke as well, but it's not too overpowering, I find. For someone getting into peated whiskies, it's quite a nice one to go for. But yeah, I would urge, if you can, if you're a whiskey enthusiast, and even if you're not a whiskey enthusiast, Islay's a cracking spot.
Marvelous. No, that's excellent, and it is. I suppose it makes sense if all your neighbouring distilleries are making smoky whiskey. Maybe it's best not to compete. Let's leave that out there. We have Evan's Gaffney's image just popped up on the screen, and I must say, compared to the dreary overcast day we've had here, that garden looks smashing. So fair play to you, lads.
I know. What is that crisps on the table? Because that is actually making me so hungry.
No, it looks good. All right, it looks good. Brilliant. So coming up next, unless there's actually anyone else, we'll give it a minute just in case someone wants to contribute in the chat their final thoughts on the Bunnahabhain. Niall says, is it too late to add Bunnahabhain to the 18-year-old tasting next week? I'm afraid it is, Niall, but maybe we'll do another one down the line. We'll see. The possibilities are endless when it comes to these whiskey tastings, and I'm sure come Christmas we'll be in lockdown 8 and looking for more ideas to fill a whiskey tasting with. Hopefully not, obviously. Marvelous. So Jack, you have the incredible honor now of introducing one of the most iconic Irish whiskies of all time. Actually, before you do that, Vitaly just popped in there. I like every Bunnahabhain I tried so far. This one is quite different to me, different to the previous two, sorry. And I guess the next two whiskies, it's marine, briny character, but lovely too. Very good whiskey choice already tonight. Excellent. So folks, Vitaly and everyone else, bear it in mind, you're going to have to vote at the end on which whiskey you wins. So keep your mind open and be careful now, because the last two whiskies, obviously we know that the Redbreast is incredible. Anyone who knows Irish whiskey knows that. But what I'm going to say is that towards the end of a whiskey tasting, you can get quite biased towards the most recent. When you're already a bit pissed, or at least going there. The last two whiskies always taste amazing. So let's see, or at least the last one does anyway. So we have to weight that in our minds as we judge. I suppose, like as if you're scoring with a handicap, So Jack, take us away with the Redbreast.
Well, just before I actually jump into the Redbreast, one last Bunnahabhain story. When I was over there on Islay, we were staying in a little place in Bamore, and I remember each morning for breakfast, you were able to get your breakfast dram of whiskey, which was a Bunnahabhain Stewardor, because it was unpeated, nice light whiskey just to start your day, at 9 a.m. God forbid, what else would you be doing in the morning on Islay?
Yeah, no, that sounds very like island life. Yeah.
Well, we started last week with a breakfast dram of the new Old Cumber pot still, and it was the first time I'd had a morning whiskey in a while. And
yeah, I was going to say it's not too dissimilar to life in Killarney, is it, Luke?
No, we always start with breakfast, assuming we're up in time for breakfast. We always start with a breakfast whiskey. So Jack, speaking of probably the breakfast whiskies, I'd say the Redbreast 12 would taste nice in your porridge as well.
It absolutely would. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I know you said it that the Redbreast 12 is one of the most, if not the most iconic whiskey of all time in Ireland. Dating back to 1939, this would have originally been Jameson spirit filled into sherry cask that would have been supplied by Gilbey's. It always would have gone under the Gilbey's Redbreast name with the little Jameson logo on the side of it. This was a classic back then. Obviously, with everything, when everything closed down, when Jameson moved down to Middleton, the brand disappeared. But then, thankfully, it was resurrected again, because the Redbreast line is such a stunning example of beautifully sherry aged, gorgeous pot still whiskey. A lot of people say modern pot stills that are coming out, the likes of the Teeling pot still, or a Hinch pot still or anything like that, they're always saying it's not quite like Redbreast. It's like, because the redbreast pot still that they have, the distillate that they have is just, it's just been perfected over the years. It really has. I feel like this should definitely win the night. I think this should definitely win it for Ireland. I'm sorry, Julie, but it's just a beautiful, well-rounded whiskey. You're getting some gorgeous vanilla. You're getting a lot of gorgeous notes in there. You're getting those pot still spices. You're getting almost these kind of shortbread, buttery, biscuity notes, which are just beautiful.
Yeah, I won't lie. I mean, it's a cracking whiskey. I think, in terms of value for money and in terms of Irish whiskies, it's very, very difficult to see past the redbreast, particularly when, a lot of, newer whiskies are coming onto the market, and, some prices are quite expensive. And, fair enough, they're smaller craft brands. They have to charge what they have to charge. But if you're coming kind of new into Irish whiskey, 59, 60 euros. Yeah, it's not cheap, but you can stretch that far. And I think in terms of like the price, it's very difficult to kind of see past redbreast for sure.
And it is important to bear in mind that kind of price side. I get, I've been attacked at times in private messages on this chat for over-egging the price by people who are interested in brands that are maybe more expensive than your average. And but you do have to like take into account how much you're going to spend on it, and the fact that this is the cheapest of the range we're going to try tonight, just behind the Bunnahabhain. The Bunnahabhain's $67.99 at Celtic, and the redbreast at the moment on the website is €60. So I mean, you do have to bear that in mind. It is definitely a classic. You mentioned about it being perfected over time, Jack. But it's interesting because we obviously had the Redbreast 10 came out recently, which was a recreation of a whiskey that was that existed in the 70s, which we had in the bar once upon a time. I was very, very fortunate enough to try it. It's stunning. We actually at Celtic Whiskey Bar have a selection of 60s, 70s, and 80s bottlings of Redbreast 12, and it's actually amazing how much the brand has evolved over the last 40 years. It does retain those pot still oiliness, that spice, the sherry characteristics, but it's so different today than it was 30 years ago. But I suppose that's the nature of all whiskey, and it's hard to, even as amazing operation they have going in Middleton, it's hard to recreate those Dublin pot stills, that kind of that classic flavor that probably wasn't even born out of perfection. Often they say those kind of heavier notes that you get in the older Bow Street and John's Lane whiskies come from the fact that their stills probably should have been chucked out and replaced 30 years before they actually shut down. So there's we look at these two rose tinted glasses, where maybe if we were living at the time we wouldn't think they were so incredible, but it is an enduring brand, and definitely one that has a place in I know that all of our hearts anyway, in terms of the three of us on here. So there's my little spiel on the Redbreast 12. Have you any more thoughts on it yourself, Jack, or on the rest of the range? Did you get your hands on a dream cask?
I didn't. I wish I did. Hopefully at some point I got to try one, but I got my hands on the Redbreast 10, which was probably one of my favorite whiskies recently. I absolutely fell in love with it. The depth of flavor and the heaviness and the spice to it. The Redbreast 12 is the cheapest and the youngest in the range, I suppose, like the core range, but it does it a great disservice to call it an entry level in any way. Like, it is its own, standalone fixture almost. Like, the amount of people that will come in to the shop that, they don't really know whiskey, they're not huge whiskey drinkers, but they just know that the Redbreast 12 is just what they want on their shelf. Anytime they kind of want to go have a whiskey, that's the one that they want to grab, and it is just that iconic whiskey. I think it is just a very well balanced, really kind of accessible, I suppose is the word to use, without again doing it a disservice by calling it an accessible whiskey, but it is just that really nice kind of balance of the spice with the sweetness as well.
Definitely. And sorry, go on, Julie.
No, on you go, work away.
I was just say, it also tells that story of our Irish whiskey so beautifully, because it's a Dublin distillate that's bottled by a third-party wine merchant, which would have obviously been the norm at once upon a time, and it almost goes, as you mentioned in your introduction, Jack, it almost goes extinct. It doesn't really come into, maybe you could correct me on this, Jack, but I believe it doesn't really become a main fixture of our distillers portfolio until around 2004. So it's relatively modern that it officially comes back. Like, I mean, the 21-year-old Redbreast now feels like a a fixture you'd expect at any decent bars collection. You know, if you'd have your redbreasts, your spot whiskies in the regular range, and you look up and you'd expect to see your Redbreast 21 along the Midleton Very Rare, but that whiskey is only released in 2013 or 2014. So you know, it's got all the connections back to the prime of Irish whiskey, while still telling us all about what we need to know about the rebirth of Irish whiskey at the same time. Niall in the chat says, such a great drink. Love the Listowel edition. The Listowel edition is fantastic. Yeah. And Jared says 12-year-old is great, but they nailed it with the 21. That's always a controversial debate. I don't know if the two of you have strong opinions on this, because I believe Julie does, but which is better, the 15 or the 21?
On you
Jack,
go,
you go
Jack.
first, or?
I think they are both stunning whiskies. I think the price jump between them as well is something to kind of take into consideration. I know you were talking about price earlier. You know, at €100, I think the 15 is a stunning dram, but between the 15 and to go backwards, I think the 12 cask strength, then, you know, that's an even tighter race. And I think for me, just the 12 cask strength just pips it by that little bit. But no, the 21 is an absolutely fabulous dram.
Yeah, I don't think Redbreast do any, you know, not so great whiskies. I think they're all great. Yeah, as I said, like, it's so dependent on the occasion as well. Here's me trying to be diplomatic here, but yeah, no, Redbreast 15 all the way. Team Redbreast 15. But you know,
Sparks. I know Brendan Power in the chat has said Redbreast 15 is the best. It's amazing. Of all the kind of, you know, people get really passionate about things in a bar, but I've never whiskey heads after a few drinks arguing over which is better, the 15 or 21. Is a much more regular fixture in the bar than you would ever expect. Like, people get really passionate about it, and they're very different whiskies. Obviously, the 15 has 15-year-old sherry in it, you know, whereas obviously the 21 is a finish. So they are two very different ways of putting together a Redbreast as well. So you can see why it divides opinion in that sense. I believe, although I'm not sure, I think Laurie Dwyer said this once, that or someone on one of his podcasts mentioned that the Redbreast 21 has a higher proportion of trad pot in it, but I don't know if that's true. Jack, do you want to tell us, for those who might be new to Irish whiskey, the kind of idea behind trad pots and the kind of heavier postal oils? Or
oh Jesus, now you're putting me on the spot. From what I remember, from a very hazy night with Derek King, Jesus, is that the heavier pot still style, like they do use it a lot more for powers. And please jump in and correct me if I say something stupid.
No, that is right. Yeah.
No, I think that when we did the Powers tasting, I don't know if anyone's on here. I always thought what you said, because Powers has that kind of heavier, peppery notes to it. So I told people for years and years and years in the bar, this is that the reason you get that is because it's trad pot, and the lighter floral green spot has the more modern pot in it. And Derek on when we did the Powers deconstruction, the John's Lane deconstruction with him a couple of months back, said nope, there's no trad pot at all in Powers, which blew my mind. So I don't know. I don't even know if the people down in Irish Distillers know what's true. but obviously this is, again, I'm not speaking from authority. I'm not trying to say, but my understanding is that the traditional pot makes the cut slightly earlier, so it has more of the heart. So it just has a bit heavier, oilier, spicier notes, and that's why, like, for example, the Redbreast 10 would be a trad pot. It's one that very rarely features on its own in their range. The Jameson 15, that iconic whiskey, would be a trad pot that kind of is closer to what the old school style of whiskies would have been before we had modern technology where we could be more precise about where the cut is made. But then I'm sure someone will come on, or someone listening is like, talking about your arse, Luke. But that's my understanding of it. But it's a fascinating concept. I wonder if maybe it's all the same, and our distillers just say this so that we waste time talking and speculating about it. Ray in the chat says Redbreast 12 is always in the collection. IDL have a good podcast dramatization, A History of Irish Whiskey, which was an entertaining listen. I actually missed that, so that's an interesting one. I don't know if either of you caught that. Did you guys?
It's done with Jared Garland. I think he does the whole thing.
I've been meaning to check it out.
Brendan Power says, is the Powers tasting, in the Powers tasting, he said LPM, which is light medium pot, and MMP was used, light medium and Middleton pot still. So Evan says, what is a trad pot? So as I say, again, this is a very amateur understanding. So there's like 3 different cuts or maybe more that they make off the still. So the raw pot still whiskies, and that's maybe something we should talk about more before because we've been drinking single malts and now this is a pot still. So we I suppose we haven't covered that kind of ground. But the pot still whiskey is a blend of raw barley or other grains and malted barley, as opposed to an entirely malted barley mash bill. They make the one recipe of it, and is in the one mash bill goes into Middleton. But as the whiskey's coming off the still, where you make the cut into the heads and tails of the whiskey, determines kind of which oils and esters are being captured as they come out, and then the bit you cut out gets sent back through the line and redistilled in with the next batch of whiskey. So where they make the cut at different points in the process, which produces slightly different elements and characteristics to the pot still. So as Brendan Power says, you've LPM, MMP, and trad pot, which all kind of give you slightly different characteristics, and then those different characteristics go in to make up all in different quantities and ratios, along with cask maturation, to make up the Middleton whiskies that we're so familiar with, be they the Jameson, Powers, Green Spot, Yellow Spot, Redbreast, all the same. Vitaly in the chat says, Redbreast is perhaps the best Irish single pot still whiskey for me, also by value for money. I'm currently exploring RB range here. Here's a life hack. You can add some Redbreast cask to 12-year-old to get it up to 40 to 48%. I found the mix quite good and probably better than a 15-year-old for me, with less spending overall. That is brilliant. I absolutely love that, Vitaly. There's a fella I used to drink in the bar in Clarny who come in and buy a small bottle of Pedro Jimenez, the Hidalgo. I'm sure you sell it in the shop, Jack. I'm sure you sell loads of it, and he'd mix it in with his cheaper whiskeys. So he'd have like a sherried whiskey with like literally a cheap blend with a drop of PX sherry that he'd mix in with it. So maybe there's another life hack for you. John Doyle says, always like Brendan's insights. Yeah, should do a guest speaker spot. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Wouldn't be against that at all. Fantastic. Have we any more thoughts, guys, or anything you want to come in? Do either of you want to correct me on my probably dreadful and factually incorrect description of pot still cuts from Middleton?
No, I was going to say, like, it's quite similar, even, you know, when you're making single malt whiskey as well. Typically, like, if you take the cut earlier on, you're going to get a lighter, more floral kind of whiskey, and the longer you kind of leave it towards the tails or the end cut, you're going to get that sort of oilier, heavier note. So your stillman will know characteristically what kind of style of whiskey they're making, and they'll determine the cuts through that.
Because we have Julie, obviously you've done the distiller's certificate, and Jack, you mentioned your dissertation was in wood maturation. So between the two of you, I think you should start up your own distillery, you know? I don't know, like, yeah, on the ball.
Everyone to invest. We head over to the last one, or are we going through too fast?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I know my Redbreast, I've only got a small bit left because after making the mistake with the Kuryoshi, I've kept a small bit now with the rest of them. Do you have any thoughts, Jack? Any one last pitch to why this should be the best whiskey of the night before we move on?
Well, I mean, I know Macallan is obviously very, very well known, but I think that it's a tough follow after the Redbreast is all I can say. No, like for years, well, not for years, I'm not even drinking whiskey that long, but I kind of had in my mind, I was like, oh, everybody likes Redbreast 12, like it's not going to be my favorite whiskey, you know, like it's just, you know, the popular one with people who don't understand whiskey. And then I went and, you know, started drinking a bit more, and I was like, fuck no, this is actually really good. Yeah, I was like, this really is a phenomenal whiskey. And I now happily eat my words with a constantly rotating bottle of Redbreast 12 on the shelf. So
I have another debate once we've tried the whiskies. Once we've settled the Scottish-Irish debate, I have another Irish debate after this for anybody that wants to hang on. I'll leave it optional. Yeah, so last but not least, yeah, I'm pulling out the big guns here with the Macallan, of course. The 12-year-old sherry matured. Great value for money for a Macallan whiskey. I believe it's €89 at Celtic Whiskey Shop. I actually had to double check the price there because I was like, that doesn't really seem right. So You might be getting it for a bargain, who knows? So Macallan, obviously based over up in Speyside, so kind of the north east of Scotland. Speyside would obviously kind of be the home of whiskey in Scotland. There's a crazy amount of distilleries there, kind of like your 60s, 70s of distilleries up there. And again, if you do get to go over to Scotland and you can't make it over to Islay, Speyside is just as good, if not better. The next best thing. And basically, like every 30 seconds you drive, there's another distillery. Distilleries you might not have really even heard of because they'd get put into blends. So it is a really amazing place, and the Macallan is located just above the River Spey there, right in the heart of Speyside. And I think it kind of goes without saying that it is one of the most prestigious, if not the prestigious whiskey name in the industry, which means that it is hard for them in the sense that they have to live up to that quality and that expectation. I suppose delving, yeah, I'm really giving it my all here. I suppose delving like back a little bit into the history, so founded in 1824, and it was one of the first distilleries in Scotland to be licensed. And they'd be really known for, taking kind of inspiration from the land and placing a really kind of strong focus on the casks that they source. I suppose kind of most recently, in the last couple of years, because nothing in the last 18 months has happened other than COVID, was the kind of launch of their new visitor centre in 2018. I'm not sure if any of you have seen pictures of that, but it's very different to the typical distillery visitor centre that you'd see. It's very much been kind of interwoven with the land in a sense, where it's actually built into kind of like a man-made hill, which is really interesting, really unusual. I rocked up there, I think, end of 2018, and went in, like, obviously couldn't get round on a tour because they were booked like 3 or 4 months in advance. The demand was insane. And I think it was like nearly $200 million or something like that it costs to make the visitor centre. No, not sure. No. But yeah, there was definitely a lot of money going through the distillery. They kind of showed me around, obviously not the tour part, but the actual visitor centre section, and it's got lovely views. I kind of sat in the car park and had my picnic and just watched everyone with their nice expensive suits rock into the Macallan. So that was quite a nice experience. But
I'm
yeah,
actually quite offended here, Julie, because you told me that you didn't do a tour because you didn't want to do one without me. Yeah. And now you're telling me it's because they were booked out 2 weeks in advance. I just can't believe the truth has come out 3 years later.
I mean, let's be honest, if the shoe was in the other foot, you would 100% be going in there without me. So
you'll never forgive me for Kilbeggan.
Yeah, no, that's a whole other story. So this one here, quite unique for kind of more recent Macallan expressions. It's more of those closer to those kind of classic older style Macallans, and the fact that it has been exclusively aged in ex-sherry casks from Jerez. It's bottled at 40%, so one of the lower kind of ABV whiskies of the night, but because it's kind of been exclusively aged in sherry casks, you will kind of find you are getting that kind of depth, that kind of dried fruit, kind of marmalade-y notes coming through. And
yeah, extraordinary nose.
12-year-old. So you will get, like, I think, like kind of hints of vanilla and almost like sort of ginger coming through, and that obviously kind of signature dried fruit note that you would get from sherry casks. And then if we give it a taste. Incredibly smooth for me. You can just tell, like, already, like, it's such a complex dram, because you're getting that smoothness at first, that lovely sweetness, and then that sort of lingering, like little bit of wood smoke and Christmas spice aftertaste. In my opinion, it's just incredibly well balanced.
It's interesting. If we were doing this as a blind lineup, I might not be able to say this is Macallan, but I would 100% say this is a Speyside whiskey. You know, it's got all those characteristics, or that kind of ilk in terms of what you get from a Glenfarclas or a Glendronach, or these kind of heavy on the sherry, kind of real kind of wood sherry characteristics coming up front. What do you think, Jack?
I think it's absolutely beautiful. Definitely that kind of lingering, kind of toastiness, I suppose, that kind of like wood smoke that Julie was talking about is really, really nice kind of end to it. The kind of the fruit up front, that kind of dried fruit sherry note coming through. But no, it is really well balanced. Like I've had a few of the different kind of Macallans over the years. I had an old Macallan 12 from the kind of late 80s, early 90s. It was one that, when I first got into whiskey, my dad kind of pulled down from the shelf. He was like, oh, I got this years ago. Tell me what you think. And I tried that compared to, I think it was probably the double wood was the first of like the modern 12s that I had. And, it was just very, very different for me. But definitely this is bringing it back to that kind of older style with just the one single maturation going through. I think there's a lot more depth to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think even the finish, I know I just take another sip there, but even the finish before, like it does really last, which I think can sometimes, and not that there's anything wrong with like a short finish whiskey, but I feel like you just, you take the time to appreciate it a lot more. But I would, 100% agree with you. I've not tried the Macallan that you were mentioning there, but particularly with some of the more modern style Macallans, they are quite different. And I think for me, I prefer that kind of slightly older style. I just feel like it has that more depth and flavor. And, it's such an internationally known brand. I think even people, when they don't know whiskey, they've heard of the Macallan. And, sometimes I think as well, like it's when you become such a prestigious brand like that, it's very difficult to kind of distinguish kind of the differences in what whiskies you really like and then maybe what whiskies you're maybe not so sure of. But I think like this is definitely a really good representation of the brand.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's interesting because it's brands, it's iconic brands like the Macallan in the 80s and 90s that reshaped the whiskey industry. They're why we have so many why high age pappies exist, or why a lot of kind of Redbreast 21s and Bushmills 21s, because aged Scotch whiskies and to the quality of a Macallan redefined the industry. So it is, as you mentioned a couple of times, that very hard to follow on from that when you've built such a reputation, especially with the kind of the changing nature of the kind of move away from age statements in the market. Tell me, Julie, why do you think they specify sherry oak on the barrel as opposed to the kind of sherry cask or that kind of?
I mean, I couldn't say for certain because what I'd just be saying here is hearsay, but they do place such a focus on, when they talk about like the Macallan, obviously it's all about the influence from the natural environment, and that's obviously in Scotland, but it's also in Spain and it's in North America. So they're very passionate about where their casks come from. And they always kind of talk about how they're using this high quality oak. And I think it's maybe another thing, maybe just to kind of set them apart and actually focus more on the quality. But again, that's just that's just kind of my take on it. I wouldn't know that for certain.
Gahal in Air Fod says Ronan, complete touch of class. Kevin says Ain Lat. I've had 5 whiskies now and I'm trying to break out the Irish. Air Fluff. Okay.
We might need to get
really,
Kevin
really
on
embarrassed.
here.
Yeah. Kevin, do you want to go live? Or Jack, do you want to break out a rouse? So yeah, there we go. Niall says good depth of flavor for such a low ABV. No, definitely. It's Kevin says I agree with you. Brilliant.
Oh, thank
is
you.
the translation. So
Get my light on here. Darkness.
it has suddenly gotten so dark. There you go. Yeah, no, it's an extraordinary whiskey, I must say. Again, it's hard to tell if you're at the if you're at the end of the tasting and we're on our fifth whiskey and you're drinking this, it tastes amazing, or if it's the Macallan is knocking out the park again. What do you reckon, Jack?
Well, with the little wager that we have going on, I can't say for sure.
What do we get if we win? Actually, we didn't.
No, we actually never
Didn't confirm this. Yeah.
It was definitely a national pride, which I know Luke will agree with me here. So obviously Luke's on my side.
Bragging, right?
But no,
I think we should win by default because, like, I mean, the Redbreast A is a quality whiskey, and B, they get to go to the Euros and we don't. So they've got a midfield of Scott McTominay and Billy Gilmore, and yeah, we struggle to beat Andorra. So the least they can do is give us this win tonight.
Yeah, well, folks, it's up to you to write in the chat there and see what the favorite was. I won't be disheartened because the Redbreast is a great whiskey. But to be honest, I don't think there is a bad one in the bunch. All very different and all very tasty in their own right.
I think
John Doyle says sorry.
No, I was just going to say, as far as the line of above October whiskies, like, you really can't have gone far wrong with this. Like, it really did kind of cover quite a lot of different styles. Obviously, in Ireland, you had a malt and a pot still. You were looking at an Islay, but not your typical Islay. You're looking at a space side, and then obviously the Curiosity. Just I wouldn't even call it a curveball. Just coming back to that kind of new era of Japanese whiskey going on over there. So I think it was a nice little lineup that we had.
No, definitely, and John Doyle in the chat agrees. He says all the tasting sites are very good. So when your English goes that bad, it means you've really enjoyed the whiskey tasting. He says well done to who did the shortlist. Brendan says well done. John says +1. Niall says Redbreast will always be one of my favorites, but of the ones I've sampled tonight that I haven't had before, Bunnahabhain is the winner for me. So now, do you want to specify? We may as well do it now while people are still able to type. If everyone wants to hit in their not without caveats, just their favorites, and then afterwards people can add in their caveats and we can discuss. So David's in there first because I know obviously Niall said Bunnahabhain, but he said of the ones he hasn't tried. So I'll let him see if he wants to just say his winner or clear out. David says Napo Castle for me. Redbreast probably lost just because of the familiarity with it, to be fair. Cormac says
Niall. I was gonna say if you're gonna put Bunnahabhain, I might see what I can do about an 18-year-old Bunnahabhain here. Joking.
Cormac, it's too late now, Niall, anyway. Cormac says Bunnahabhain, Niall says Redbreast, Tom says Redbreast, Napogue, and very impressed by the Bunnahabhain. So we'll take Redbreast because that was his first answer. Barry says Macallan. Emily says 1, 2, 5, 4, 3. So that means she thinks the Kurioshi is the best. So that's interesting. Rob says Macallan. Brendan says Bunnahabhain. Nice surprise. Jared says defo Napogue / Redbreast. So he's just hedging his bets on the Irish whiskies there. But we'll take Napogue as the answer because it's the first one. Kevin says jumping off now, I really enjoyed it. So thank you, Kevin. But we'll keep moving because we've got the answers coming in. Donald says Redbreast, Napogue, Redbreast, then Napogue, Redbreast, Kurioshi, Bunnahabhain. So I think the Redbreast has won.
That's okay, Jared. We'll let you off.
Seamus says Macallan and Bunnahabhain. So even keep coming in with the answers, even though I've just said Redbreast one, because I think we've got one.
No, I think Redbreast.
Okay, yeah, definitely now. Justin Vitali came in at Redbreast. So Redbreast for Vitali, Redbreast for Justin. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've probably got 11 Redbreasts in there on a chat which had, at the moment, I think at one point we had 30 people on and there's 27 now. So we take the 3 of us out. That means you've got 11 of 27 or 26 that are saying Redbreast. So I think the Redbreast probably does have it. definitely. But it's interesting to see. I'm surprised that Balhaven's. I really enjoyed the Balhaven. I really like that style of whiskey. But it's interesting that it's held up there. It's held its own. I wonder if the Kuryoshi would have got more if it was later on in the tasting. I don't know. Well, what do you reckon over to Julie and Jack for your reaction to those exciting results? I feel like I'm hosting election night here.
I was about to say, you actually sound like you're commentating a match here.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that I expected the win, but I think it's no, really, it's been a while since I've had that Bunhaven, and I actually haven't had that Macallan yet. So I was very impressed and definitely worried there for a little bit. But no, as I said, the standard was fantastic tonight. So I'm humble about it.
Yeah, no, I did think that Redbreast, just because it's, you know, it's just such a iconic brand and it has such a great following and it's such a great whiskey. But I do think, yeah, as I said earlier, like they all stand out in their own right. I never tried the Kuryoshi, the first one before today, and I thought that was a great whiskey. And funnily enough, Emily, when you said it about the bubble gum, again, I don't know if it's maybe because you said it, we all have the kind of habit of doing that. But I went back and I was like, oh, I'm getting all these like apple flavors and bubble gum coming through as well. So that was really interesting to highlight.
No, definitely. So Julie, you mentioned there before we came onto the Macallan, you were like, "Oh, I've got something to say, but I'll wait till we taste the Macallan." You're gonna drop that bombshell on us now. What is it? No pressure.
What one was this? The Isla story, or was this the debate?
No, just literally just at the end of the Redbreast 12. You said I'm going to say something, but I'll wait until after the Macallan.
Yeah. So obviously we talked about the controversial debates between the Redbreasts, the 15 and the 21, most specifically. But my controversial debate today on the chat is Redbreast 12 or Powers John's Lane.
Oh, interesting.
What's your thoughts? For me, I think I'd have to go John's Lane. I can actually see John's Lane out my window right now, and it's for me, it's still, despite the fact that like I'm living on Bow Street, like Jameson is right here, but no, Jesus, like John's Lane is just such an iconic part of Dublin. And like, if anybody follows me on Instagram, I've been annoying everyone by doing this little like tour of Dublin where I'm finding little Powers peas around the place and posting them up. So like the Market Bar in Dublin, their windows still have the Powers pea because they were all the old bottling plants. Over in John's Lane, the like the downpipes from the gutters had the pea branded into them. So I need a life is what I'm trying to say.
No, that's really cool. I appreciate that.
But as the whiskey itself, John's Lane is it's a phenomenal, you know, good, solid Dublin whiskey, you know, that really nice depth of spice to it. And I feel like I'm just kind of really shitting on the Redbreast now, but I'm not. So.
No, I find it hard because John's Lane did come in as the first thing that was nearly as good as a Redbreast, you know, as in like there was, you know, for a while there was nothing quite like the Redbreast in Irish whiskey, you know, and like when I first started working for Celtic, once you went through the major brands and the obvious choices, there was not a lot else to explore in Irish whiskey, you know, and that's kind of what got me into Scotch, because you could just spend your whole life still discovering new different iterations and brands because you've 127 distilleries, whatever there is in Scotland. So the Powers John's Lane, I have a really affinity to it for that reason. For you, like, it's like, you know, the move from the Powers that I would have horsed over to old men in bars in South Kerry 10 years ago to the what the brand is now with Three Swallows and John's Lane and everything. It's phenomenal. I love it. I love the Powers brand, but I do think the Redbreast is a better whiskey. So the Redbreast has it for me. I think Powers might be edging it in the chat though. I know that Shane Prendergast says Redbreast, but Niall, Rob, David, Alsay, and Cormac. Well, no, Cormac doesn't say, but you know, Alsay, Powers, and Vitaly says Redbreast by Edge. So Redbreast edges it. So, you know, it's a difficult one. That's a good curveball to throw in there, Julie, to get everyone talking. Rob says, what sells more? I mean, definitely in the bar in Clarny, it's Redbreast. What do you reckon it is in Dublin, Jack?
Hands down, it's Redbreast. It really is. John's Lane is something that I do like to turn people onto, especially if they're saying, the Redbreast 12 is something that I've had before. I want to kind of go not away from that, but kind of linear within that. Then definitely, I think it's €4 in the difference. I think 64 for a John's Lane. So I think it's a nice one to put something onto as kind of a next elevation. It's definitely a heavier style, a bit of a kind of a meatier palette to it. So I think it's still always going to be Redbreast. It'll always be Redbreast, but I'm going to push John's Lane on people. I know Barry said, what would Derek King do? And I don't think that's a question you ever want to ask. So
no, really not. No. I don't have that kind of budget for that wardrobe. Julie, if you adjust your camera slightly, behind you actually is the framed copy of John's Lane. So in the old John's Lane,
maybe we can see Jack's house.
In one of the older editions of I'll just pin you there just to make sure people can see that while I'm talking. But in the older editions of Redbreast or John's Lane before they rebranded, that image from Alfred Bernard's distilleries of Ireland and Britain was used to come with it. It's a lovely little depiction of Redbreast or of John's Lane a wee while ago. So yeah, there you go.
Oh,
Brendan says
Power has some good insight.
Side fact: currently, Power's John's Lane 12-year-old is made up of 10% first fill sherry 18-year-old, 30% first fill bourbon 14-year-old, and 60% second fill bourbon 14-year-old. So really, it's John's Lane 14. And now that you say that, Brendan, Derek did mention that on the chat. I think on the night that we did the deconstruction, he was saying that at the moment the makeup skews to the older, but you'd also say that could change. That is very interesting. That reminds me of, speaking of the whiskey you tried tonight, remember when Glendronach 15 was effectively Glendronach 21 for a few years or whatever it was, because they didn't have 15-year-old stock. So that's very interesting and well pointed out. Thank you for sharing that, Brendan. Okay. Ray says, okay, gurus, I've had a bit of a bad habit of leaving the last 1/4 in a bottle for ages, bracket saving it. Any thoughts once bottle is opened for how long it's good for, or is there a rule of thumb? I don't know, do you want advice on how long the whiskey's gonna ask, or do you want us to give a deeper insight into why you can't let go of the end of this whiskey? Is it did someone hurt you a long time ago and you just can't move on? Your shelf needs to be occupied by this 1/4 bottle of whiskey. So I don't know, Jack or Julie, which do you want to cover? Do you want to cover the psychological or the scientific side of this?
Well, I don't mind taking the scientific side if Julie wants to take the psychological side of it.
Sure, yeah.
I suppose, like, obviously something, strictly scientifically, legally speaking, anything over, 38%, 40% is never going to, it won't go off. But definitely oxidization can occur, and you'll start to kind of lose the flavor as it goes on. So it's never going to be dangerous to drink. It'll never be kind of bad to drink, but it may, and sometimes for the better. It can sometimes very much change up from when you opened it and first poured it until you leave it for a few months, kind of half full. It'll change up the flavor of it as you go.
Yeah,
very basic way of explaining it.
And from the psychological point of view, I feel your pain. It's always hard for that, last bottle kill, isn't it? It's just, then you have to fill the shelf with something else and find the funds to do that. And, are you going to forget what it tasted like? It's all these first world problem struggles that we have. But you're in a safe space here because we're all the same. I'm saying.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, you can't even let go of the 30-minute sample you were given.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Julie's one though. After a few drinks, you'll get ruthless, and you'll be looking at the shelf of whiskey. You'll be like, there's only like 2 shots left in this Glendronach hand fill that I got 4 years ago. Let's finish that off. Get rid of it, clear up some space on the shelf. And I'd be like, no, we're way too drunk to enjoy such a high quality whiskey. But that's my problem. Like Jack, you mentioned you're going to have a sample earlier. I'm one for that, where I have like little samples of really rare and high quality whiskies that I probably will never in my life find the moment where I actually feel comfortable sitting down and drinking them.
Yeah, I think it's all about people are always, want to save a whiskey for a special occasion, but I think if anything the last year's kind of taught us, then every Friday night can be a special occasion. Especially if you've got the kind of setup that Evan Gaffney has, a couple of pals in the garden there, like no better time to enjoy a couple of whiskeys. That's
He
great.
must be in South Africa or something, because there's like, it's still bright there. It's pitch black outside my window, like.
Yeah.
Unless he's watching this on recording and there's some sort of weird time loop going on here, but there you go.
Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. Listen, we've lost about 6 people since the Macallan was cracked open, so they were obviously clearly just waiting to taste the last whiskey and then get out of Dodge. But it's been a fantastic hour and a half. Thanks a million, both Jack and Julie, for giving over your time. Thanks, guys. We're on the east coast of Dublin, so it stays brighter for longer in Dublin. That actually makes sense because, like, Jack, obviously you're in Dublin as well, and there's still light coming in through your window, and Julie had to turn the light on. So Jesus, they need to adjust the time zones. No, thank you so much, guys. Is there anything you'd like to say before we finish up? Anything you'd like to plug?
Well, thank you, Ray.
Nothing in particular. I mean, definitely drop into the shop, say hi, talk about whiskey. And then, obviously with the bars, eventually being able to open up, you can go down on Noy Loop. So
yeah, please do. We're desperate to have people in. We're hopefully open when indoor dining returns in July. So please do get down.
Yeah, I fear, Jack, it could be the other way around. He's not had that interaction behind the bar for so long that it could be the other way around. A quick question there from Thomas Google there about Whiskey Live. I can't disclose too much information on that at the moment, but there is going to be news very, very soon, in the next week or two.
Oh, Jesus.
Live.
You heard it here first. Now, I actually think I'll give away the information that she's going to do in a recent tasting. So, if you're an eagle-eared, you might have already heard it. But
yeah, I think probably there will not be the full event this year, but you won't be waiting as long as November 2022. Is all I will say there. Perfect. If you're on Celtic Whiskey mailing list, will we get first dibs? We will announce it probably there first, but we are moving to a bigger venue, which is not a secret. We were moving from Dublin Castle anyway, so I would be hoping that there would be plenty of tickets. General admission tickets will be sold first, and then masterclass tickets, we haven't confirmed the masterclasses yet, and we usually announce them probably in a couple of months' time in terms of the actual event, but there might be something else happening as well.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Julian. Thanks for everyone for joining and sticking around for this long after the last whiskey was cracked open. So it's these tastings that I've mentioned at a few of the ends of most of them were started to support the bar at a time when we weren't able to operate the Irish whiskey experience because of social distancing. It's still not back open yet because we can't we don't have the space to operate a restaurant and space out and the Irish whiskey experience. So we don't know when that will return until sort of social distancing leaves our premises or we find a new way of reworking it. And this is an evolution of that side of things, and it's great. So when you buy a pack for this, you're supporting the bar that's barely operated for 15, 14 months now. So thank you for your support. And thanks again to Jack and Julie for joining us. And we'll catch you on the other side. If you've any questions we missed or anything you want to add, both myself and Julie's email is on the Zoom link, so you can hit us up on that. So brilliant, Jack. Thanks again for joining us.
No problem at all.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. We'll all talk soon.
Thanks again.
Brilliant. Thank you.